Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right. Good evening again. My name is Christopher Spencer. I'm currently the manager of the public procurement branch at NEPA. I don't know who introduced me. Was I introduced? Was there a blurb about what I do and who I am? No?
Yes, sir. There was an introduction being done already.
Okay. Don't need to get into it. I have over some 18 years public procurement experience. And I don't usually say a lot about myself in forums like these. I'm kind of nervous, so you can just bear with me, please, while I get my bearing as I go along. Okay. Wow. My apologies. You seen the definition slide, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Everybody seeing the definition slide? Anyone to say yes? Okay, good.
Yes,
well,
sir.
Procurement. This presentation is about give you some of the essentials or the basic essentials of public procurement and public procurement as it relates to Jamaica and how it is practiced in our jurisdiction. But first of all, I'm speaking to the definition of procurement in general. So the general definition of procurement is the acquisition of goods, services, or works in response to an identified need. It is usually referred to or previously referred to as planned purchasing. Public procurement, on the other hand, is defined as the acquisition of goods, services, or works in response to an identified need for government use. So what happens in government or public entities that any money that is being spent, and I'm speaking particular to Jamaica, and it also applies, I don't know if the same thing applies in other jurisdictions, but once $1 of the taxpayers' money, or well, all of it is taxpayers' money, of the government's funds are being spent, whether we are spent on behalf of government, whether it's a grant, a loan, budgeted funds, or a gift, it is expected that the public procurement practices within Jamaica be used to execute those expenditures. And as we go along, we'll get in more detail as to why the government requires this. The procurement process, and this applies to all procurement processes, both public and private, is basically three broad areas. The first area speaks to procurement planning, where we look at why we want to procure something, a good service or work, what that item is, and try to define it, the requirements, the specifications, where we're delivering it, meaning what location it is, what location is to be eventually delivered to, when, as in the date and time that it is required, and the who speaks to two parts. Basically, one, which supplier or what supplier, or which entity, branch, or user. More so, who is the user, because that also is integral in the planning stage. Selection and contracting is that area now where it looks at sourcing the market, finding the right vendor and the right item and the right contract terms and availability. So it's about going to the market, looking for the item, what processes we use to define the item, what processes, what criteria used to select a vendor, choose a vendor, and eventually what terms the contract will be settled at, to include payment terms, insurance, and other contending things. Contract administration now speaks to the management of the performance of that contract which you have put in place with a supplier or a vendor. So it looks at managing the delivery times, following up to ensure that there are no issues during delivery of the items or collection of the items, checking the items to make sure that you get the correct quantity, or the item is the requirement or specification that you will deliver. And also now following up on evaluating the supplier. Were there any issues during the procurement? Any lessons that were learned? Were there issues with the supplier? Were there issues with customer service, warranty, any after sales support? Did the items or item or service live up to what was required over what period of time, and stuff like that. The idea is to put all of this information and feedback on file and in part of your knowledge bank. So when you go to do a similar procurement or a similar transaction, this information can inform us when we're doing the procurement planning for our next transaction or a similar transaction. These three categories are basically expanded into 6 steps. So the procurement cycle, whether public or private, is 6 steps. The first step is need analysis. Second step is funding approval. Third step is procurement planning. The fourth step is supplier selection. The fifth step is contract management, and the fourth step is procurement evaluation. And if you look at it, you see it's just an expansion of those 3 broad areas. And I'll expound on each one of these. Need analysis in the procurement cycle at first stage. This is where, and let me just go back to these first 3 stages on this slide is basically done during the planning stage. Remember, in the definition I had mentioned that procurement is planned purchasing. Well, these first 3 steps or stages in the cycle speaks to the planning, and this is where the bulk of procurement occurs, right? Usually these 3 stages are not done within a procurement branch or a procurement department, but the procurement branch or department is integral in managing or assisting in this area. But this area is usually done by either the users or the branches or areas that requiring the item, right? So the first step, needs analysis. This is where we identify the need to be met or the problem to be solved. And usually if we can define the problem correctly, then it is easier and more efficient and effective in executing the procurement or the transaction. Sometimes the solution to the problem is usually within the entity themselves. So a lot of times somebody may say, okay, we have the need, we want to buy a TV. But a TV is not the need. A TV is what you say you want. But what is the problem that is to be solved? Is the problem that you require a display unit, because it could not be a TV, a monitor could also be used, a computer monitor, or it could be that you want to use a projector. So again, as I say, it is identifying the need and not trying to say what it is that we think we want. Right? Sometimes the solution, as I said, is available within the entity or within the same area that is asking for a purchase or a transaction to be executed. And sometimes is procurement the best solution, because sometimes the item can be borrowed from somewhere within the entity or another entity, or the item can be rented or leased rather than bought. So those type of things come out in the need analysis. Funding, now after you have determined your need and what might be the best solution or item, transaction, or perceived transaction to solve that need, is where you're going to funding. You develop a business case and you source the funds. Most entities, this is where people prepare a budget. So in putting the budget in place, now you do your procurement plan, you look at it and say, okay, these items are, I want to buy a television. We have to make a business case. Why do you want to buy a television? How will the television provide value to the entity? And depending on the entity, some entities might have a return on investment threshold that we might have to meet, or you have to satisfy in order for them to say, okay, yes, you'll get the budget for these funds. And then maybe you might have developed your specifications, your requirements, saying that, okay, based on our need analysis, we need a 95-inch LCD television. But when you go to source the funds, finance is telling you that, okay, we're not able, based on our priorities right now, to give you $150,000 to buy that. We're going to give you $100,000. Then you might have to adjust your requirements and your scope and say, okay, is it possible that we can use a TV with a smaller viewing size? And then you might have to adjust your requirements and scope to fit the funds that are available. Procurement planning, which is the other steps, speak particularly now to how you go about defining what category your procurement falls in. Is it a good, is it a service, or it is a work? And then what are your rules within that entity, or what rules has the government put in place to guide the category of procurement? What methodology you have to use? What evaluation and award criteria was established or to be established to determine the selection of your supplier, as well as the selection of the items amongst what is available on the market that will be required. And of course, you're documenting all of this, as well as you may need to look at, are there existing arrangements? Does the company that you work for, or within the government entity, does the government have some existing arrangements with certain suppliers, or already with a particular supplier that may allow the entity to get a discount or some other benefit outside of just purchasing of the television, some reward points, get a 95-inch for the price of a 65-inch, or is it that some other, your entity might already have some arrangement to get these items at a particular price for the fiscal year or for a 6-month period. The fourth step is supplier selection. This is where now you actively go into executing the evaluation, whether you're going to do that individually or as a committee, but it is where you look at what criteria was set up for the evaluation, and then where and who gives approval. Is it a procurement committee? Does it have to go to the head of entity, or is it based on the value, something that can be done within the public procurement department or a director? Or do they require outside approval, like the Public Procurement Commission, formally NCC, or based on the value, as I say again, might require cabinet approval. There's also a requirement for us to notify the public of the award of the contract. So these things have to be put on the website and may even have to be published in the newspaper. And currently the government has an electronic portal that it uses to manage and advertise and manage the receipt and opening of tenders. That portal also allows for the notification of award publicly as well as privately, where the persons can be advised that they have been awarded the contract. And when the contract is signed and awarded, it is published. You can publish it on the site. So you can go there and see all the contracts that have been awarded by government entities on that portal. Of course, the supplier selection, it is important that there is documentation. The evaluation and approval process is documented, and all issues leading up to that, whether there's negotiation or any clarification that are requested, the contract, of course, and the purchase order, and if there are any insurance or bid bonds or bid securities or advanced security bonds that need to be put in place for the transaction. Contract management is another crucial step in procurement cycle. Speaks to, as I said before, the publication of the award. After the contract has been awarded, you have to publish that award, the monitoring of the contract, and the supplier, the performance. Now, There will be contract management or not be confused with contract administration. Even though procurement may do some form of contract administration, at times there is a liaison person. Usually for the larger contracts, there is some technical persons. They are the ones who do the actual administration of the work or the service when procurement manages the contract from the side where we monitor and follow up to see if deliverables are being done on time, and if there are any issues, what contract clauses may come into play, and where we can get recourse. Also, there are some major projects, say there's a building or installation of equipment where we have to monitor the transition. When the training takes place, knowledge transfer, our manuals given over, our keys transferred, is there any after-sales service, and to ensure that the timelines are met and that there is a closeout where any questions, concerns, defects period, all of those things are done and documented and put on the file that is relevant to the transaction. Procurement evaluation now, this is after closeout and contract complete, where say we look at the procurement. Was the outcome achieved? Was the item, good, service, or work that we set out to procure, has it solved the problem? Did it meet the need? Has it satisfied the need that we had identified? And if it had not, what areas did we fall down, or what areas did we not do what we ought to have done as efficiently or as effectively as we ought to have done it? We do some root cause analysis. We also do performance assessment of the supplier performance, and of course any lessons that we've learned. Did we not plan properly? Did we neglect something in the evaluation? Did we miss out a criteria? Is it that we should have asked for some particular specification? We didn't actually do all of those things. We try to document them, put them in our knowledge bank and on the file for the transaction. So any party coming after us or we ourselves can refer when you go to do a similar transaction or another transaction in the category. I am looking at what I have done is I do a procurement cycle for buying a particular good, because the procurement cycle, we practice the procurement cycle every day, each and every one of us, whenever we go to buy anything, but we do it so fast and so quick. So I'm just going to, what I have on screen is an example of the fact that we need to attend an event, check our pants, the pants is ripped, so we decide that we need new clothes. Now I need analysis to say, okay, we're going to buy new clothes, with what type of clothes? We want a new pants, we want it to be a jeans, skinny jeans, we decide on the size, we decide on the color, and then the other attendant thing that we think we need, and then we move to the next step, which is funding approval. Are we going to get money from our parents? Are we going to use savings? Are we going to try and get it as a gift? Or are we going to use our salary to buy? And then depending on the amount of money that's available, from whatever source you're getting it from, we might have to adjust the clothes based on the amount. Or we decide that we may need to wear something else. All right? Then we go to the procurement planning stage where we decide, it's something that we can get online. Are we going to buy it locally? Or are we going to assess where we're going to get it from or what item to try and buy? Are we going to go to the place and fit it? Or are we going to ask people for reviews, whether online or friends or family? Or are we going to plan to borrow, beg, or possibly steal it, depending on, again, the funding availability? Supplier selection, we look at availability. Is it available in stores nearby? How long will it take to deliver if it is online or if we do it online? And which stores may have what we want or what might be in stock, as well as does the store or vendor have a return policy? What is their location, even though it's local? How close to proximity the location? The downtown, uptown, Spanish town? And do we want to go and deal with a supplier we're not familiar with or one we're more familiar with? The contract management comes in where we receive the item, check for issues, we try it on and other things, ask how it look, take a picture, send it to your friends. Does it look good? Do you like how it look? Does it fit all right? Do we have any matching clothes? Is it possible that we can get an exchange if it comes to that? And then the procurement evaluation, where we look at the customer service we receive from the supplier. Did they deliver on time? Is the item of the quality that we want? Does it wash out? Didn't wash out? Is it fit as advertised? If it has a look, how long did it last? Etc. Again, the procurement side. As it relates now to public procurement, there are some over 12 principles, but for this particular presentation, I've identified and pulled out 7 of the more, I consider to the more critical ones. And the first one, which is usually what drives public procurement worldwide, is value for money. This particular principle looks at the economic and efficient use of the financial resources. So whatever money you're attempting to spend, we need to identify if it is suit whatever we're attempting to get as a good service or work. Is it suitable for what we're purporting to use it for? What is the useful life of the item? Are there maintenance costs that are going to be coming with this? Are there any admin costs to acquire the items? Will it require storage? What is the turnaround time? Will we have to pay for delivery? Are there insurance costs to get it up and running? Do we have to insure it while we have it? All of those things have to be a part of the procurement planning to determine if what we're going to do is the best value for money. Right? Economy is another principle which is on the high point of the procurement rung of principles, simply being that the economy speaks to, or value speaks or imply more than price. So it's not just about buying what is the lowest price. Quality consideration, what I spoke about in the procurement planning, is very critical. The lowest price does not equate to the lowest cost over time. And this is evident in many things that we do every day. So the fact that we're going to buy a 95-inch TV don't necessarily mean that we're going to go there and buy the item that has been listed at the lowest price. Yes, we want a 95-inch TV, but we want one that not only give us the lowest price, but possibly have a 3-year warranty. We want one that needs to respond to voice control. We want one that is smart and have multiple connectivity. So it can be connected by Bluetooth, NFC, Wi-Fi. Possibly that we might need it to also connect to other devices like Apple devices that might need to have Apple Ear. Right? So all of that need to be considered so as part of the economy. So we don't just go and buy the lowest price thing. We are going to buy the item the lowest price that has met the specifications or requirements that we want. Efficiency now is another critical principle where it is indicated that all procurement should be simple, swift, and provide positive result with the least amount of delays. And the general idea is that if there's too many delays, or there's a delay or the extended or protracted delay in any area of the procurement step, then procurement is becoming inefficient. A huge part of the procurement principle, particularly in Jamaica, is the idea of ensuring that there's fairness in the system, and fairness particularly to the participants, more so suppliers and contractors. It must be seen by these people and practiced in the process of consistency. It must be seen to be reliable, and it must be also impartial. So whatever mechanisms you're using for evaluation, selection, and award of contracts, it should be impartial, and a level playing field should be there for all participants, meaning all participants should have access to the information at the same time. All participants should have access to the same information. So we don't send out clarifications or queries or response to queries to only some participants. All interested parties should be able to get the same information at the same time, and nobody should be feeling left out based on what has been done by the entity. Reliability. The reliability principle speaks particularly to all the rules within the public procurement process. They should be established, maintained, accessible to all, and unambiguous, and not only seen to be not only fair, but seen to be fair. So the perception is critical, as well as the accessibility of the rules. So all the rules of public procurement in GOJ are available on the Public Procurement Commission's website, formerly NCC, and the GOJ's Government of Jamaica Ministry of Justice website, which has the Act, which is now being used. And there were usually, prior to the Act, there used to be the Public Procurement Guidelines, GOJ Guidelines, and Public Procurement Guidelines. All of those were accessible to all and published to all. And usually the language is written so that it is clear and easy to understand and not litigious. Equity. This is where now the opportunities for participation by all is promoted. So currently a lot of suppliers and persons in Jamaica are of the opinion that most government contracts, when they're advertised and how they're written, evaluation and the criteria required is for large companies and large businesses. But it is not so. They are valued areas you can write in your instructions or in your evaluation criteria and allow, depending on the scope of what is being procured, participation by small businesses, or even write it in your internal policies, that is the policies of each entity, what percentage of your available procurement spend that you may want to direct to certain small businesses or different categories of small businesses. This seventh principle is the one that scares a lot of people, speaks to transparency and accountability, more so the ethical standards within procurement. What has been done with the Act in particular is that practitioners are responsible for enforcing and obeying the rules. So the Act puts the onus solely on public procurement practitioners and other employees within entities for keeping within the established rules. Any action or award of contract or any decision is subject to challenge, and sanctions can be made based on the Act. Sanctions are defined for neglecting or bending those rules. The academics and history has proven that accountability within the procurement process is a key inducement to individual and institutional probity, and also a key deterrent to collusion and corruption. So the more transparent and accountable the process is, less likely it is for there to be collusion and corruption. So that last thing takes me into the Public Procurement Act slide. As I said before, what most of us are familiar with is the GOJ Public Procurement Guidelines. So a lot of people used to say the guidelines and the regulations, but there was a regulation that was established in 2008, but those guidelines have been replaced by this Public Procurement Act. It was established, was brought to Parliament in 2015 and agreed at that time that it would be coming into effect. However, just a little history, the government at the time decided that the Act did not allow for the Minister of Finance, that would be the minister who is responsible for public procurement, there was no allowance in it for him to exempt items from the process, meaning the rules of the Public Procurement Act. And the Act would not be passed until that amendment or that addition was made, where the minister can designate any contract activity or any activity to be exempt from the Public Procurement Act. So once that was written in and a few other amendments made, along with the regulations, because there's a public procurement regulations of 2018, it became effective April 1, 2019. So as of April 1, 2019, the Public Procurement Act is the policy document that drives public procurement within Jamaica. That act speaks to the establishment of an Office of Public Procurement Policy, which was formerly the Procurement Policy Implementation Unit. This is a unit within the Ministry of Finance. Some years ago, it used to be called a Policy and Asset Unit, but they're two separate units. In former years, they created two separate units, a Procurement Policy Implementation Unit as well as a Asset Management Unit. So the Office of Public Procurement Policy now replaces the Procurement Policy Implementation Unit. It also establishes the act also brings into play the officer, the Chief Public Procurement Officer, which is the head of that public procurement policy, the Office of Public Procurement Policy. The act establishes also a Public Procurement Commission, which replaces the National Contracts Commission, the then NCC. It also establishes procurement committees, or it states how they are to be established. It lists methods of public procurement and the approval levels and tiers. It indicates and describes the surcharge for officer or employee and any liabilities and offenses under the Act. It outlines the procurement process and any exemptions that fall within, or the categories of goods, services, or works that fall within the list of exemptions. And it outlines the consideration, appeal, and review process. And I'm going to go into detail into more of these as we go along. This slide speaks to the role of the bodies, or most of the bodies that have been established as per the Act, or speaks to those bodies defined in the Act, Public Procurement Act. The first one is the Office of the Public Procurement Policy. Their role is to do policy development, implement, train, and provide advice on public procurement. They also submit an annual report. They should provide an annual report to Parliament and advise the Minister of Finance. The Public Procurement Commission, their role is to promote efficiency and integrity in the public procurement process and provide the public in general, the taxpayers and other stakeholders, with some, what you call it, confidence in the public procurement process. They also deal with the approval or endorsement of contracts above $30 million Jamaican dollars. The registration of and classification of suppliers and contractors is also done by this body. And they are the body, they establish some sector committees. So all public entities within the Jamaica shores, once you're doing a transaction or a contract or awarding a contract that's over $30 million, you have to make a submission to the Public Procurement Commission. But it does not go directly to the Public Procurement Commission. What they have done is set up sector committees. So you would have a Information and Communication Technology Committee, or an ICT committee. You'll have a Construction Works Committee. I think you have a Goods Committee, and I think you have a Services Committee. So depending on where in what category your contract falls within, then you'll make a submission to one of those sector committees. You go there and defend your submission. They ask you some questions, interrogate the procurement to see if it is within, it was done according to the Act and the rules and procedures. And if they find it okay, then they forward it to the Commission. The Public Procurement Commission meets twice a month. So they would forward it to one of those meetings with a recommendation for approval. If not, then they'll give you some ideas on how to correct or how to adjust or edit your presentation, or possibly go back to market or redo the procurement, depending on the outcome of what you've presented. Procurement committee, these are usually established by the head of entity. So the head of each procurement entity, as per the Act, they are supposed to establish a procurement committee in-house. That procurement committee reviews procurement proceedings on behalf of the entity, make recommendation to the entity, read the award of those contracts that they have reviewed, and are supposed to maintain proper records of the meetings and recommendations of any contract award. And those things are very critical, meaning the minutes of the procurement committee and any submissions made and any deliberations as to outcome. The head of entity or the accounting officer. So in government circles, there are two types of accounts officer. There's the accounting officer as well as the accountable officer. The accounting officer is usually the person we refer to as the head of entity. So I think a permanent secretary would be an accounting officer. CEO, managing directors, those are accounting officers. But an accountable officer, which is usually confused by a lot of persons, is maybe a procurement officer, finance officer, an accountant, a works officer, a contracts administrator. Those persons are accountable officers. They're accountable for the transactions that you do, but you're not the accounting officer, is the one who is responsible for the entire entity or the head of the agency. They have the overall responsibility for all processes connected with procurement, and it is clear in the Act. One of the first things that's mentioned in the Act. The head of the entity is to ensure that there's a development of an annual procurement plan for the entity, establish a procurement unit, branch, or department, and ensure compliance with Section 19 of the Act. The specialist procurement unit or procurement unit, and the reason the Act is using specialist procurement unit is because the Act clearly says that the procurement unit should be established and staffed with trained procurement professionals. So the specialist procurement unit is responsible for procurement on behalf of the entity, all procurement. It's supposed to be responsible and manage the process. It's supposed to plan activities according to the needs and budget, submit the procurement plan annually, advise the head of entity, prepare tender documents and contracts, and monitor contract implementation. Let's see, repeat again, the monitor contract implementation. Excuse me. I've created a slide for the reconsideration, review, and appeal. So this is what you call the appeal section. So the Act, Public Procurement Act, also has a section that speaks particularly to Section 49 of the Act. It says any person or firm claiming to suffer loss or injury due to action or decision of a public procurement entity or public procurement within an entity government can apply to that procuring entity for reconsideration, review, or appeal. So reconsideration meaning they're appealing your decision, or they want to review what was done or asking for you to review it as an entity, right? And they're open to do this. I mean, you can either show, or we ought to show them if they so ask. And most times, most of the evaluation, particularly for the larger things, are published, meaning we don't get into the details of the evaluation, but if there's a scoring mechanism, we say that we got 5 bids or 6 bids, and out of the 6 of them, this one ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, because we got 60 out of the 100 points. The other person's got 50, 51, 53, and so the length. So if any of those persons want to see a breakdown of how they were scored particularly, or look at the evaluation, the detailed evaluation of their bids, then usually we have a one-on-one with those persons, but we don't publish the information or the details of individual bids. There's a timeline for reconsideration, and the timeline is that any request for review or appeal should be submitted during the standstill period or before the award of contract if no standstill period is indicated. Usually with the transactions going to the competitive bid, we list a standstill period. So depending on the value of the transaction or the risk or the scope of the work, we make it maybe a longer period or a shorter period. So for a smaller work, it might be 5 days. For a longer work, larger work, it may be 10 days. It can be up to 3 months or 2 months, depending on the value of the transaction or the scope of the work. And that standstill period, the period between when we notify our suppliers or bidders that, hey, we have made a decision, this person is to be awarded the contract. You have 10 days in which to appeal or review or look. So your timeline for consideration has to be done within that time, or there might be no grounds to go any further. Upon the receipt of the request by the entity to reconsider or review, notice must be given urgently. You should publish that notice in the prescribed manner, and within 5 days should decide if a review is required, has merit or has any merit. You should provide a response within, and I've on the slide 4 days, but it is 14 days. So a response should be provided to the supplier or the person or firm within 14 days. If you're not satisfied or if the bidder is not satisfied with what is provided by the entity, then he can then write to the procurement review board. And this procurement review board is also available for the procuring entities if they send a submission to the procurement, the Public Procurement Commission, and the Public Procurement Commission for whatever reason turn it down, then they can appeal to that review board. And it is, I think, in recent times, the market transaction might have been one of those that we would have referred to the review board. So if you made a submission, a market transaction that was in the news, you made the submission, was rejected, then you can appeal and give your reasons for appeal and have it reviewed. Suppliers who are registered or refuse registration or refuse classification in a particular category can also apply to this review board for them to reconsider or look at the reasons for the negative outcome and make a case for it to be overturned. There are 4 public procurement methodologies. They have been around before the Act, and they have been mentioned in the Act and the regulations. International competitive bidding is where you invite any person, firm from wherever in the world, they can bid. So it is open to local and foreign bidders as long as they meet the criteria that has been established in the document or in the instructions. National competitive bidding, any national supplier that is local, firm, company, person can bid. And then there's restrictive bidding now. This is where a competitive procurement process is established, but it is limited to a number of suppliers. So you invite probably 5, 4, 6, 3, depending on what you're doing. So for instance, right now, if you wanted to put out a bid for CUG, it will be limited because there are basically only 2 companies in Jamaica that provide closed user group services for phones, and it is Cable and Wireless, Cable and Wireless Jamaica, Flow, and Digicel. So it will automatically be restricted. It don't make sense to do an international competitive bid or a national competitive bid because there are only 2 providers. You just send them the document. Single source now speaks to goods, services, or work that is being bought from a specific supplier without a competitive process. It is most times referred to as direct contracting. Now, this particular type of methodology is one which is, a lot of people say it is faster and tend to want to use it, and it is the one that gets a lot of persons in trouble, because though you are choosing one source, which is not an issue, your justification, as well as the rules which have been established, allow you to choose one source. However, the justification has to be reasonable, as well as, even though you're choosing one source, when you get that response or quotation or bid from that person, that bid is still to be evaluated to determine if it is providing you the best value for money and is in the best economic interest of the entity. The 3 established limits as per the Act, they are around before the Act, but since the Act is the policy, the major policy document or the principal policy document, Tier 1 limit is where the head of entity is allowed to approve values, all contract values up to 30 million. The Tier 2 limit is where the Public Procurement Commission approves contracts above 30 million up to 60 million. And Cabinet now approves all contracts above 60 million. Point to note that whichever level it is, so for instance, the Tier 2 contracts, even though they are to be approved by the Public Procurement Commission, you still have to have the head of entity's approval or recommendation before you take it to the Public Procurement Commission. And even though Cabinet approves contracts above 60 million, you have to have your head of entity's approval and the Public Procurement Commission's approval or approval for recommendation of award before you take it to Cabinet. So if you don't have the Public Procurement Commission approval, Cabinet will not consider it. If you don't have your head of entity's approval, Public Procurement Commission will not consider it. And this slide shows you a small depiction of the difference between procurement and purchasing. So the objective of procurement is to identify a need and fill it. The objective of purchasing is to buy items as requested. The procurement focuses on value. Purchasing focuses on price. Procurement engagement is from start to finish. Purchasing focuses on the time to buy. The major tasks in procurement is to analyze, source, then contract. Major task in purchasing is to order, deliver, and pay. Supplier management under procurement deals with long-term win-win relationships. Supplier management under purchasing deals with transaction speed, efficiency, delivery, and short term. Soon as the transaction is over, you don't need to talk to the supplier anymore. The carriers that are listed, that are the general carriers that are usually involved in public procurement. I've listed them here: Chief Public Procurement Officer, Director Public Procurement, and you go down the line. Those on the right are more indirect, but requires public procurement training and knowledge: auditors, business analysts, supply chain officer, and bid and tenders.